Yeah, it was probably influenced, the name, and I guess with blue being kind of the dominant brand color, it's hard for me to say that there was no influence whatsoever.
Well, you know, also Brad, when he was at Yale, started a startup at Yale called Go Cross Campus.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Gaming, really? I didn't know that.
Almost got bought by Zynga, but
almost.
Brad didn't believe in Facebook as a gaming platform. Why would you want to play games on Facebook?
I know. So first of all, I'm honored to lead this discussion with you guys for a couple of reasons. One, I think General Assembly. First, who here has heard of General Assembly? Okay, so a testament to the strength of the brand that these two guys and their team have built. It's particularly special for me because about 3 years ago, when I started Cross Campus, the mission was to provide a work environment, a community, and an education curriculum for creative professionals, startups, and entrepreneurs. And I modeled a lot of what we did on General Assembly. They were this New York company that was building an amazing brand really quickly. They were very intentional about everything from their space design to the way they communicated, the words they used, the images. And so it inspired me and drove a lot of how we kind of thought about the business early on. We launched about 2 years ago. About 6 months into it, we realized something. We realized that education was really, really hard. It was really hard to do right. Customer acquisition is tough, getting butts in seats, developing a strong curriculum, defending that curriculum, finding people to teach that curriculum. And we ultimately pivoted and said, look, we're going to build our business on work environment, community, and events. And events has become a critical part of our business. Our flagship Santa Monica location is really a community hub due to those events that Kevin mentioned. We're raising money now. We're trying to expand into other locations throughout LA and hopefully further. Now, going back, so we kind of, I don't know if I'd call it a pivot, but we realized education was hard. We tried it. We tried to run some classes. And then about 3 months after we realized that, I read that General Assembly is undergoing their own pivot, and we'll discuss whether that was a pivot, but they said, you know what, we've built this great work environment in New York that's a community hub, but that's not the business we're interested in. We're going full on with education. And you guys raised what, like $6-7 million in that round? So it led, the first thought is obviously, shit, what did I miss here? But once that kind of thought faded away, I realized, well, you know what, they understand how hard it is and they're executing well. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so first of all, I would say it was not a pivot.
Not a pivot.
The funny thing is when you launch with something in this world, like everybody's got such a short attention span that they sort of, whatever that first sort of thing they understand you as sort of becomes that
Well, because you were successful at the environment. So when you're successful at something, you say, we're not going to do that.
So the funny thing is, from the moment we launched the space, we love that space. We love the startups that were in it. We've had tons of successful startups come out of it. But the minute we launched it, we realized, okay, we need to find something else to do with this. Because as we thought about what success would mean, and again, we had 4 co-founders, 3 of them went to Yale, and we needed growth to sort of support that overhead. At the time, this was just a little cash flow positive real estate project, like what you're doing. Really smart. It's a great business. And so we started looking for growth, and we just didn't want to sign about, 1 million square feet of leases or anything like that. I had just been working in private equity during the last financial crisis, and I saw what happens when you take too much long-term liabilities and try to offset that with short-term revenue. And so we started looking for other ways to kind of supplement what we were doing and experiment before we really thought what was actually going to happen was that we were going to move off and do our own startups. So we started offering classes. Brad really was running that program at the time. And just trying to see what would happen if we I think we had a class called The History of the Internet. We had how to raise your seed round. We had why you should use NoSQL database structures. And these were all short 1-hour classes.
You guys are trying a lot of different things.
Just throwing stuff at the wall. And to our surprise, it just kept working. And it definitely was a moment in time because I think you're right. It was incredibly hard. And we just didn't learn it was incredibly hard until it was too late. We had already committed to it.
Right. Now you raised, so that raise was like what, $6-7 million?
So we raised $4 million in the fall of 2011. So by that point, we were completely
education. And Maveron
led, which is an amazing venture capital firm, sort of backed by Howard Schwartz. But we had other great investors involved, Jeff Bezos, Yuri Milner, all sort of, behind this idea of building this sort of global community of individuals empowered to pursue work that they love.
Physical campuses. So then you raise that money, you open up, what was your second city outside of New York?
London, actually.
London was before San Francisco?
Yeah.
Okay. We wanted to be international from the start. We thought it was incredibly important to build that international brand and not just be pigeonholed into tech.
I gotta ask you, is that why Yuri Milner was interested, because of the London egg?
Maybe.
So okay, so you build the London campus. You show that you can replicate the success overseas. Then you raised another round. It was 10.
We raised our Series B was 10 million.
10 million, and then so the mission here again is to scale. So just to give the audience an idea of the scale here, over 100,000 students have come through your programs. 9 campuses, physical campuses around the world, roughly. An online education business, and then you're offering education in other cities through partnerships.
That's the way to reframe it. I mean, I hate describing the history of General Assembly benchmarked by when we raised money, because we really started doing this. The first inflection point was when we started doing really transformative education, which was not just one-off classes. One-off classes is how we started, but around 6 months later, this was, I remember Jake and I in front of a whiteboard saying like, okay, if we're gonna do this for real, we need to make this transition from just like, hey, I want to come and learn like an hour's worth of JavaScript to, can people hear me by the way?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so there were some no's.
Volume up a little bit.
Thank you.
Or
Closer. Oh wow, yeah, these mics are super sensitive. All right, cool. So we pivoted from, not pivoted, sorry.
That was a bad word.
That was
Refined.
actually, that was actually going from classes and workshops to courses, like, that's the closest I think we've ever come to saying like, okay, this business is nice, but like there's this other big thing that's much more impactful to the mission of this company. And that is going to these 12-week transformative programs, teaching things like web development, user experience design, digital marketing, product management. So that was a real inflection point of GA, is when we decided to like, these classes and workshops are fine, but it's really these transformative programs that are going to empower people to pursue work they love, where the real opportunity is.
Yeah, and I would say that with that sort of came this thesis that I think is very relevant to today's conversation, which is that, we, being all Ivy League grads, like, I mean, we, at very different times, Brad and I went to Yale, but like, had very similar experiences, that liberal arts is at the core of our American educational system, and it's incredibly important. I mean, we all come from it, we can't really knock it. It's amazing, our entire country, and really most of the developed world is based on it.
Teaches you how to think, basically.
Well, that's the conventional wisdom. I think a lot of things can teach you how to think, though, so I think we should be wary of that as the value proposition of liberal arts. But I think it's just sort of how we've built the value system around what education is and why it's important. And so the problem with liberal arts is that those institutions, for the most part, are not really set up in a way to deliver sort of just-in-time practical skills to help those students be competitive the minute they sort of hit the ground running in the economy, especially this 21st century economy where the expectation is that employees can add tactical value on day one. And so we want to be a complement to that system by providing these sort of just-in-time skills, do it in the context of a community, a global community of people who all sort of share those same aspirations and vision for their future, and then use those two elements to really provide new opportunities and on-ramps for people who want to be able to sort of start a new career or level up their career trajectory in technology, business, and design.
Okay, so now I'm not checking text messages. I'm actually reading something here. Now,
is it phone time?
Yeah. Speaking for LA and probably other markets, your mission has become more broad and more, I don't know what the word is, but it's not just about the classes. You're helping people find jobs. You're continuing to work with them in the long term. I'm going to read something from the blog post you wrote when you, just recently, when you closed your Series C financing. So I apologize for going back to financing, but so General Assembly raised a very healthy $35 million round. It was led by IVP, obviously one of the most VCs in the industry. Mavron participated, others. And you wrote, our mandate, our deepest organizational responsibility is to support these alumni, not just now, but for many, many years to come. It is this obligation that led to our new round of funding for General Assembly, designed to ensure that we will be able to educate students and help decades of alumni yet to come. I thought this was interesting. The tone was interesting. It didn't read the way you would expect. You know, we've raised $35 million. We're going to scale from 9 to 20 campuses. We're going to grow our online business. It sounded more like we want to build a Yale. We want to build a venerable educational institution over the next 75 to 100 years. Am I reading into it too much, or is that pretty accurate?
No, in fact, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is really sort of how we think about GA.
Well, you told me to bring it up before.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Kidding, you didn't tell me.
So, you know, and I would say we don't really talk in terms of we want to build a Yale. I mean, because Yale has frankly been around for 300 years, and we admire that greatly. And we don't really talk about like, disrupting something like Yale, because I just don't think that's ever going to happen. But at the same time, I think we look at institutions that have been around a long time and said, what makes that work, right? I mean, Yale has gone through countless transformations over the centuries in terms of the value proposition to the students, to the funders, how it's funded, all this stuff, but sort of has stayed true to some core mission throughout that entire life. And when you start building a big company, I mean, when you get to kind of the Series C, and if you're not really just in it for the quick flip, you start asking yourself questions about how do you build an organization that can stand the test of time? And the answer is there's only one thing you can really think about, which is your core stakeholders, which is in our case, our students and then our alumni. And the same way that Yale cares a bunch about their alumni, because that's how they build buildings and fund those buildings and fund scholarships and things like that, we care about our alumni for a little different purpose, which is that becomes the core value proposition of coming to General Assembly over the long run, is that we want to build a global community of people who are empowered to pursue work they love. And that truly means you have to people not just all starting out in their career, but over time this will be people at different stages of their career, except for they'll all be focused on design, technology, and business in hopefully the most upwardly mobile sort of arc of their career in the most dynamic cities around the world.
What does that mean for I mean, I get that, that's the vision. What does that mean for the business model, monetization, you know, the active on the ground stuff? I mean, where do you guys grow the business? And
I would say that, like, the thing about, wow, I just found the sweet spot. It's nice. I would say that at the end of the day, we look at what we're building at GA as an organization with a vision and a mission. We have a brand that stands for our values, and the business is actually already multiple businesses, as you can tell by the fact that we were in real estate, we did courses, we did classes, we do executive education, we do a lot of support services for our alumni. My guess is that will only grow in what we do. And our goal is to just continue to provide products, services, and opportunities for our stakeholders that sort of fit with that core vision of empowering people to pursue work they love.
I would say that you can have many stakeholders, but you can only have one customer. And a very intentional decision we made early on is that the student is our customer. And we do a lot to place that student into positions and work with them to make sure they meet the right companies. But we decided very early on that we were not a recruiter, that we were not going to charge companies for access to our students, which is a decision a lot of our competitors have made different decisions. So
right.
we decided that you can really only have one customer.
I mean, you create the engagement between companies and your graduates by virtue of the community and the events and all that. You just don't monetize directly.
Because we don't believe that monetization it serves the longer term mission of building a global community.
Right, that makes sense. All right, so Brad, you wrote something a year or two ago that I read, and it's a soundbite that I've probably used dozens of times and I've never given you credit, so I'm now officially giving you credit. And what you wrote, which again I thought was really insightful, was that events are the best way to demonstrate authority in the market for someone today. Whereas 5-10 years ago you might have written a blog post to demonstrate authority. Today you would moderate a panel, you'd host an event. The technology, things like Meetup, things like Eventbrite are there to make it easy, and so you see more and more events like this. And actually with Cross Campus, our event business is core to the business. Again, it generates brand, we serve as a community hub, but it's customer acquisition, and we don't have to pay a dime for it. In fact, we make money on it. Is that, and with General Assembly, you've grown in, I think in LA and other markets by creating these events, giving people a taste of the product. Is that the customer acquisition strategy? Are you changing it? Are you adding to it? Where's it going?
I would say just as much as the community is part of the product and it's part of that promise and value we deliver to our students, it's also a customer acquisition strategy, because we look at, we have a very viral product. Like, we have an incredibly viral product, because someone gets in a course and their life is transformed and they have a new job on the other end and a new skill set. They're going to tell their entire network. They're going to post it on LinkedIn. They're going to tell their friends and family. So we have a very, and people don't realize this, but it's an inherently viral product in a lot of ways, and the events and the paraphernalia that surrounds it and represents the community is just a way of reinforcing and manifesting that.
I think of the events that we have, kind of like, you know, Nights at Maury's and things like that. It's part of the atmosphere that both solidifies the experience and makes it something you'll remember, but also welcomes new people into that experience all the time and lets people know sort of what you're about.
Right. So now I took a class, but I took a course. I took a data science course.
You did?
I did.
Awesome.
I'm a data science.
You're an alumni.
I'm an alumni. Yeah.
That's amazing. That means I have to do whatever you want.
Okay. Wow. Within reason and boundaries of the law, of course. So one of the challenges, I think, with what you're doing, and again, this is not easy, is some things you can teach in 12 weeks or in, you know, front-end design or product marketing. Some things, like data science, which is highly statistics-oriented, or even programming and coding, it's harder to teach in that period of time. Some of the things, you know, this just, maybe the format isn't ideal for. You know, talk about the challenges of
Are you saying that you felt like it was too fast or advanced in data science?
I got a lot out of the class,
okay,
because I'm a statistics wonk.
Awesome.
And so I love learning about machine learning, and I programmed when I was younger, but you know, frankly, when the programming stuff came out, I just went to one of my cross-campus members who was sitting next to me, who's a 30-year plus programmer, and I just watched over his shoulder.
Oh, I see. So you
cheated.
That's a time-honored tradition, and
yeah, exactly.
That's what I did at Yale too.
And actually, and maybe there's an opportunity there to do buddy or you know, team.
Yeah. So I mean, look, I would say,
say
as you see us grow, we will be finding new and better ways of teaching everything. I would say data science is one of our more advanced classes, which always comes at a cost because it makes it less accessible and require people who have prerequisites, and that's why the admissions rate on that course is very low. I would say in general, you know, our vision is not, you know, people say like, what can you teach in 12 weeks? And the reality is, I mean, we are all lifelong learners. That's what we will be. We are all on a journey from novice to expert, and then we do that again, right, and again. And so the goal of General Assembly is to give people an on-ramp, a moment of accessibility where they can acquire enough skills in the context of a community that those next opportunities will be available that maybe otherwise wouldn't be. And so I would think of what we do as more like retrofitting or sort of tooling up the last mile of a skill set in order to allow somebody to get that foot in the door, as opposed to sort of creating experts overnight. Like, that's just not a real, I don't think, you know, I was on an expert in anything leaving Yale, and I don't think you'll be an expert even in data science leaving General Assembly.
Unrealistic, yeah.
But you'll be able to sort of know enough to be dangerous, and if you want to go more, if you want to do it professionally, there will be plenty of people who'd be willing to hire you.
Right, it certainly helps you get a job.
Correct.
So you talk about the journey from novice to expert, right? Let's talk about the early parts of the journey. Let's talk about Yale. So you were involved in YEI.
I was not, because YEI didn't exist.
When did you guys?
Miles, who was my class at Yale, founded YEI.
Oh, wow, okay.
And at the time, I was not really interested in business and entrepreneurship. I wanted to be a rock star. I just basically hung out with my singing group and smoked a lot of pot.
I did the latter, not the former. I was a part of. Do you remember B&K?
Of course.
B&K, one of the underground societies, no longer exists.
No.
Yeah, no longer exists.
So I was just back, and I did find out that the pundits still exist.
Okay, cool. Okay, so but when did you? But you were involved with the no.
Yeah, in the early days.
In the early days, okay.
Both YI and Yes.
So you weren't interested in entrepreneurship necessarily, which is interesting.
Yeah, that was the journey I had in my 20s, sort of going through this experience of graduating with that Yale degree. You know, my diploma was Latin, so I figured it was like a magic Harry Potter spell, which is going to open doors magically. And I sort of had to go through this process of being incredibly lost and lonely, and in my career, trying to find that direction. And I think that, in a lot of ways, was the inspiration for at least my contributions to General Assembly.
Right. And Brad, how about you?
So I was a little bit of a different, on a different path. I actually was very interested in entrepreneurship in college. I got my start my freshman year selling buying antique card catalogs from Yale and reselling them on the internet, which was super fun.
Did you corner the antique card catalog market?
It's actually really interesting. It's like there is a whole market of people out there who love the idea of buying this piece of like American academic history. Oh, I just found the sweet spot with the mic too. Sorry for everyone who could not hear me for so long. So we bought these card catalogs and these pieces of American academic history and resold them online, which was still to this day some of the most fun I've ever had in business or entrepreneurship. And then one day, Barry Nailbuff, I was talking to him and he told me that I didn't have a startup, I had a job. And I was so demotivated by that I decided that I wanted to like find something else and go raise a pile of venture money, because that must be what having a startup is when you raise a pile of venture money. That means you have a startup. So that's what I went and did, and ran Go Cross Campus, this gaming company, for about a year and a half while I was in college, and about a year after until we ran it into the ground.
Wow. And so then you guys got together and had the idea for General Assembly? Basically?
I mean, it really came from a bunch of different places. So Brad's co-founder in both the card catalog antique company and Go Cross Campus was Matt Breimer, who had just graduated from Yale. And I met him at a Yale Entrepreneur happy hour in New York City. And I was fascinated by this kid who was running this event. He was the one hosting it. And so I spent a lot of time just trying to understand, and I was in my early 30s, I felt like I was past my prime. And I was really just hustling for consulting work. And I met this kid, I was like, wow, but then he started talking about wanting to build this clubhouse for entrepreneurs in New York, and he was looking at a commercial lease, and I was like, whoa, buddy, like commercial real estate is not as simple as like getting an apartment. Maybe you should come over and have some beers with me and we'll model it out and we'll see if it'll work. His persistence led to sort of us actually looking at spaces. He brought in Brad at the time, who was his co-founder on every other project, and then we met our fourth co-founder, Adam, who had been sort of coming at it from a different angle of wanting to build a design incubator, taking inspiration from IDEO. And so we all kind of met, and you could sort of feel those forces kind of mixing together. And there was something in the magic of the four of us that created what General Assembly is today.
So that's interesting to hear that. I joined with a second guy who was a real estate expert who had the same conversation with me. He said, whoa, let me help you analyze this. And then the third co-founder had started an accelerator in LA. So maybe that kind of combination is maybe it's more than just serendipitous.
I think we also all started our things in sort of a moment in time when this idea of an entrepreneurial ecosystem started to take hold.
Yeah.
And the generation previous in terms of entrepreneurial ecosystem tended to be relatively balkanized and pretty much focused on service providers who had something financially to gain from sponsoring stuff in the startup community. It was either lawyers or venture capitalists or accountants who sort of would host these events. And we wanted to our original idea was to build something that just was free of venture capitalists. Like, we didn't let venture capitalists sponsor, they didn't have special access. We told them if they wanted to be part of it, they had to belong as a member just like everybody else. And so I actually got a lot of people who never used the space to actually just pay us so they could come to our events.
They were the best kind of gym members.
Right, they never came. And frankly, we've taken that and run with it, and it works. It's a good model of engagement,
Because I think we think the moment it becomes an accelerator, it becomes a different thing. It becomes an investment thesis.
Absolutely.
And that's not the same thing as a community.
It's actually directly in opposition to the idea of a community, I think, because you have people who are, there's an inherent competition to it of like, oh, we all want this money. And, I think we were able to build something bigger because we went away from that.
Let's talk about competition. You guys are growing a big business. You're not under the radar screen anymore. You've got folks like Udemy and Coursera, Code Academy. You've got the online, MBAs and other online programs. Where do you see competition coming from?
Well, I think you have to think about competition in a very different way in our space, because I mean, if you look at, I mean, you know, because we have such school spirit, we may consider Harvard a competitor to Yale, but are they really, right? I mean, there is room for a lot of people providing that kind of value to their stakeholders. It's a very, very, very big market.
It's not a first-to-market
that
market.
Being said, it's definitely been an experience we've had where the cat is out of the bag, and you know, we certainly have a lot of people who sort of look at us and then think, oh, all you need is a programmer in a room and you have yourself a school. And some of those guys are doing a great job, and you know, we will look at sort of doing stuff with those guys, you know, as we get bigger. But I think, you know, we'll see a lot of, this is now a very, very, very hot space of just this idea of helping people tool up for the modern economy. And I think there's a lot of room in it, but I think it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. And I'm just glad that, you know, we've got a fortress of a balance sheet and a great mission and a 300-person team of people who are incredibly focused and believe in what we're doing. And I think it's going to be a pretty fun ride the next few years for us.
And also, you mentioned a few of the online players like Udemy and Codecademy and Coursera. We love those guys because they raise awareness for the idea that these skills are accessible and are not just simply the purview of wants and computer science majors. And however, it is very, very, very challenging for someone to actually go through a transformative experience and come out the other end with employable skills on those services. I mean, the dropout rates, the completion rates are just really tremendously bad. So then a lot of those people end up coming to General Assembly if they're really serious and saying, hey, you know, I tried learning how to code using Udemy, Code School, whatever. I got interested in it, but I kept getting stuck and it was taking too long. I actually want to do this for real. And that's really where we see a lot of our students.
Interesting. And I know some of them are moving into physical in-person education as well, not just completely online, but again, that's going to present all the challenges you guys face. You've raised the Series C, you've got the fortress, the balance sheet, Jake, as you referred to it. Do you start acquiring or looking at acquisitions at some point?
I mean, I think any company at our size starts to look at it. I would say, in general, the road ahead of us is pretty clear, and we're very focused on just the stuff that's really important to us, right? Providing more and more value to our students and our alumni, continuing to make more of the world have access to what we can provide. And, you know, there will always be moments where things might make sense to buy, but in general, this is a game of just every day doing our, as in the words of Jim Collins, our 20-mile march, and that's what we're focusing on. Yeah.
Yeah. How many cities are you in right now? Either with a campus or
you know, I always lose track, but so roughly. We could do, okay, so on the East Coast, I'm just going to work down the East Coast. It's Boston, New York, DC. We just announced Atlanta. On the West Coast, we just announced Seattle, and we have San Francisco and Los Angeles, and then we have Hong Kong, Sydney, and London overseas. There'll be a few more. So what is it? What did you count?
A dozen?
It's 10. Okay.
So what is it? I mean, what's it going to be a year from now, 2 years from now? I mean, does it?
I don't think we're like McDonald's, right? Like this is not a game of just more stores or Home Depot or any of those kind of things.
Or Kaplan Test Centers.
Or Kaplan Test Centers.
Not that.
It's you know, I think there's a certain diminishing returns to having physical locations, and I think you'll see us be much more careful and tactical as we go. You know, we want to be places that are great cities that have the opportunity to build their own startup ecosystems, and we love being part of that. But I think there's a certain point at which, you know, if you really want to be part of the General Assembly community, you can probably just come to a city near you and take our courses. And we don't know where that moment is.
Right.
I doubt you'll see us triple our campuses in the next year or two.
One of the so we're in fundraising mode, raising money. And one of the things that I find frustrating is this question of, well, what's the exit, right? Particularly you talk to the angel groups, really traditional.
You're not a cash flow business. You don't need an exit.
Look, I'm focusing.
Why are you even raising money? Just cut checks to yourself at the end of every year. What are you doing?
Well, no, we're not at the stage where we can fund out of cash flows. We still need capex to expand, but
take a loan.
Or find some old dude who just likes
take a loan.
Cash flow.
Really?
Somebody
loans exist? No.
Who likes cash flow businesses?
Trust me. I was an econ major, so I look at the capital structure really creatively. Anyway, but this question of this focus on what's the exit makes no sense to me, because I turn around and I say, look, I'm trying to build a great business. Look at how we've executed, constantly trying to refine the product religiously, generate and scale cash flows, and the response is, great, well, what's the exit? Like, the board will get to the point where we can...
So, it's very important to understand that, like, when you go into the world of venture capital, what Brad did when he thought he wanted to be a real startup, right, or what we did once we took our Series A, is you are making a deal with the devil. And I apologize to the venture capitalists in the room. Sorry.
I think they know that. I think...
Because it's a good deal for many people, but it's still a deal, and there are trade-offs. Those venture capitalists have limited partners who have given them their money with basically a blank check, but it's only for a limited period of time. And that limited period of time means that at some point they have to give the money back to their LPs. And that means that they would need money from you in order to be able to give money back to their LPs. And thus creates the need for an exit within 5 years.
Yeah. Although I do think that if you're building something that's generating scalable cash flows and has a good operational infrastructure, whether it's an acquirer, whether it's a PE firm, like there will be an acquisition, or should you give dividend back to investors? I don't know.
PE funds don't pay the same kind of multiples that the public market does.
This is true. Okay, let me open it up to the audience. Anyone have any questions for Jake and Brad? Victor?
I think Michael Bloomberg was recently quoted as saying, it's not realistic to expect everyone to learn how to code in order to get a job. In fact, he specifically said, let's be realistic, coal miners are not going to learn how to program. And so, if we're going to try to push everyone to this digital economy, we have to be sensitive about education, I guess. So what's the General Assembly's founders' position on who can learn how to code? What's realistic?
Awesome. Yes. No, not everybody should learn how to code. Like, and I think we have to sell that there has sort of become a very hand-wavy kind of like movement of the people that should say that if everybody learns to code, everybody will have jobs in the future, then we'll all this happy techno-utopia. And it's not really the case. Like, there's a lot more going on. So we love coding. I think coding is a great skill, especially right now. It's imminently employable. There's a huge shortage of them. In 10 years or even in 5 years, that may sort of cycle out a little bit. And not to say that coding won't be in demand, but it may not be like, God, can we just get our hands on as many junior programmers as we can? So that's different than this other idea, which is that we should teach coding in our schools. Teaching coding in our schools to me is about two things. It's about literacy for how the logic of our modern world works. That's awesome. I also think coding is an awesome way to teach advanced math. And it makes the experience of advanced math something that's fun instead of completely tedious. Like when I learned to code, I was like, shit, if I had done this, I would have actually probably taken a math class at Yale. By the time I got to Yale, I hated science and math because of the way we taught it in high school. So coding is awesome as a teaching tool. It can also be an awesome skill in the workforce, but we at GA very purposely teach UX design, product management, digital marketing. There'll be more subjects coming along. We're much more focused on the entire sort of range of skill sets that we think sort of make up the biggest chunk of knowledge work in the 21st century, and we want to help people get those skills and those on-ramps to those opportunities.
And actually, I think, Victor, your question is a great one. Expand that same question, address it not just to coding, but to this whole subsets of new economy, information, idea, experience economy type skills, user experience, product marketing, coding. Do we want everyone to be able to acquire these skills? I mean, are there people, do we need traditional, people who are doing other stuff? Where do you draw the line? Do you feel like it's offensive or threatening to more traditional folks?
We still need barbers and cosmetologists as well. It's just, I don't think we're necessarily the right people to
I don't know, people can build machines to cut hair. I mean,
do you want to stick your head in one of those?
I mean, we are in San Francisco.
Techno-utopia.
Right. No, we are in San Francisco, so we can talk about our robot's going to come and rule us all, and maybe, right? But I think if you look at that future's been projected many times in the past, and I think I'm actually on that subject a big fan of Jaron Lanier, who's sort of a philosopher and technologist and former entrepreneur, who writes a lot about how that future is not inevitable. Like, we as humans are in control of our own destiny that way. And so I think there's lots of possibilities to think about what we want the labor market to look like. And I would say, the other thing I would say is like Yale, I think GA is serving a very, very small overall portion of sort of the whole sort of socioeconomic system. And we're okay with that. Like, there will be advanced manufacturing, there will be 3D printing, there will be all sorts of interesting service opportunities, there will be artists, there will be, this is not about, trying to sort of build the people who are going to build the machines that will rule us all. This is about like an economy that's always in flux, and people need to have more access to just-in-time training for those skills.
Yeah. I think you might be a little bit too modest though in terms of that slice staying small. I think that slice, more so than at any time in history, is getting larger for some very fundamental reasons. We've got a member across campus who builds robotics for the largest printing company in the world rather. So when you order a book from Amazon, it goes and it gets bound and print through these $50 million assembly lines of printing. He goes into plants, he takes them from 300 employees to 6, and sets up sensors and machines and screens that say, when the red exclamation mark comes up, pull this lever, and gets death threats. And it's not an it's not the exception. That's happening, especially with the Internet of Things and the hardware revolution. So I hope for your sake that this slice of new economy skills is a growing slice.
And I hope for our sake that not all the workers in the world are replaced.
It would certainly create some socioeconomic challenges. Any other questions for Brad and Jake? I guess if not, we can, one more over here. Oh. Where do you see the upper level education industry globally going in the next decade or so, given folks like General Assembly?
And so by virtue of sort of where we sit as sort of the education innovation sort of cycle, right, we get invited to a lot of these conferences with a lot of more legacy educational providers. And I would say, in general, we are definitely heading towards a massive reckoning. Yale is going to be fine. Princeton's gonna be fine, NYU, great, probably a lot of the state schools sort of figure out their own way. But that is a small portion of, like, there's 4,600 colleges, like 4-year colleges.
Accredited universities.
In the United States. I would guess that at least half of them will probably face impending bankruptcy within the next 15 years. It's something that people don't talk about or think about, and everybody's in deep denial about it. And that's not going to be because of us. It's going to be because of the online access you might have to NYU. Why would you go to some random school in the middle of the country?
Or MIT or Stanford.
Or MIT or Stanford.
Great universities.
Now, that being said, I think there's opportunities for those schools that are smart and see the future to create value, because as much as Stanford and MIT and Yale will put their content online for free, there's a reason that those institutions are willing to put their content online for free. That they know that people will still pay for it, because the value is not in the content, it's in the experience, it's in the alumni network, it's in the sense of being able to affiliate yourself with this 300-year-old brand. And so it's just going to be a little bit of a race to the bottom in terms of not really those top tier schools, but the next tier. Who wants to sort of go like to you and start offering their program to everybody and anybody around the world who wants it? Who's going to sort of try to sort of do the mass market higher ed approach?
Brad, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think when we talk about higher ed, there's a big association in our minds because many of us went to Yale with like really high-end schools. But the fact is, like, there are a colossal number of those 4,000 universities, probably a majority, that really have no reason to exist other than the fact that they're accredited, and they're accredited for legacy reasons because it's very hard to get accreditation and it's very, very, very hard to lose it. So the fact that you have all these legacy institutions that are basically existing upon their accreditation and their accreditation alone, I think that's where the reckoning is really going to come. Yale's going to be fine.
Yeah, and I would say that the thing that Yale has that I think is incredibly special, and I think as we think about supporting our alma mater and stuff like that, is that these world-class research institutions will become not commodities as well, because there are certain places where those tenured professors are being subsidized by the undergraduate populations that will disappear. Something like Yale with billions and billions and billions of endowment, with preeminent scientists, will be able to really hold a torch for what I think is like one of the most important sort of time-honored purposes of the university, which is to make sure that we're sort of preserving and furthering knowledge for the next generation.
That day of reckoning in universities, is that happening in Europe, in other countries, or is that a US phenomenon? I know you probably haven't thought of that as much as...
It's going to happen in a very different way because of US...
do other countries have that density of just...
No, because they were much more, because the government got involved a lot sooner in the payment and the funding of these universities, so they kind of managed capacity a little bit better. After World War II, the GI Bill sort of led to this massive explosion in universities designed to really serve all of those returning soldiers and veterans. And that kind of led to this, what we have now, which is this legacy infrastructure that's going to be disrupted.
I would say that there's somewhat of a unique cultural aspect as well, which is just as 10 years ago, everyone needed to own their own home in the United States, and that wasn't really a phenomenon that existed in a major way in other countries. You have the same cultural implications around everyone needs to get a 4-year liberal arts degree to be a functioning member of American society. I think that is going to cause a greater distortion in the way American and Americans think about education than there will be in other countries where it's completely legitimate to go to in Germany, say, to go to a vocational school followed by an apprenticeship.
Or Australia.
So you're not going to see Peter Thiel offer his fellowship in other countries. Awesome. Thank you very much. Put your hands together for Jake Ronen and Brad Hargreaves.